So in the previous video, we had implemented and set up Google so that we can log in or authorize Google for our application. We got into the Google console, we set up a new project, we had used that to create an OAuth consent screen, and we also got the client ID and the client secret from that particular um, Google console. And then the next thing which we did was have added Google here, which basically just is an href to Google's authorization, and we had the OAuth redirect URI also added to the Google console, and in that way we were able to add Google into our list of OAuth services very quickly. Now, in this video, in the end of our Spring Boot Oauth 2 tutorial playlist, we will be adding an error page for unauthenticated users, and we'll also add a very interesting functionality on top of it. So here's what we're going to do. So we have GitHub, which is our initial primary way of authorizing our application. And now what we do is we make sure that only the GitHub users which are part of a particular organization and GitHub, only they are able to authorize into our application. So now we have an extra requirement from our GitHub OAuth users. So they have to have a GitHub account, and they also have to be part of a GitHub organization to authorize or log into our own personal application. And if they are not included inside that particular organization, then we throw an error message, and that's what we are going to implement today. So we'll be implementing an error message for people who are not a part of a GitHub organization. So let's see how that works. So on the client, we should provide some feedback for a user that could not authenticate. And to facilitate this, we can add a div, which will eventually add an informative message too. So first, let's add the div to our static index.html. So here we can just add a div, which is a container text danger error. So it gives out a red text message, which helps us show that it's an error. Then we can add a call to the /error endpoint, which we haven't implemented, which we'll implement in a few seconds, and populate that with a div with the result. So similarly, what we have done with /user, we do the same with /error. So let's see how we can implement that. Pretty straightforward, nothing complicated here. So all we have to do is %.get /error, comma, function data, and here we do if data $error.html, we fill it up with data, and that's it. Else, if we actually do login, then we don't need anything there. So all we do is have an empty string. So we can just copy this, and instead of data, we just have an empty string here. So in this way, whenever we get an error message from the /error get endpoint, we fill it with the error message, and if not, then we just put it as an empty string. Now let's go and implement the backend for it. So to add an error message, the first thing that we need to do is we need to capture it when the authentication fails. And to achieve this, we can configure an authentication failure handler inside our configure method. So let's see how we can do that. So all we have to do is have an Oauth2 login. So here inside Oauth2 login, we implement a bunch of stuff. So we do and here we can do a dot failure handler, and inside the handler we have a bunch of information. So inside the failure handler we can do request, response, and exception. So let's directly add this because it's just boilerplate code. So we have it inside the Spring documentation, and all we have to do is this. And we're good to go. So we have an handler error here, so let's see what's causing that. So the next thing which we need to do is make sure that our configure method is implemented correctly, and we'll be good to go. So yeah, here we have our /error, we have our simple URL authentication failure handler, which is the default /URL, and here we add an Oauth2 login, a failure handler, which basically sets an attribute in that particular session. So we save an error message, we set that error.message whenever the authentication fails, and then to retrieve this error.message, all we have to do is add another endpoint on top of this. So here, just like we have /user, all we have to do is add another endpoint, which is /error. So let's implement that now. So let's do a get mapping /error and public string error http servlet request, and we take in a request, and all we have to do is string message equal to, let's typecast it into a string first, and this will be request dot get session dot get attribute, and the attribute is error dot message. So this is the message that we want, and once we get the message from the session, all we should do is delete that attribute, so that in the next session we get a different error message and we don't show the same error message there every single time. So we can do a request dot get attribute dot remove, get session dot remove attribute, and we just remove error dot message since we are already saving it inside message, right? So all you have to do is return message, and that's it. So what did we do here? So here we catch our exception error inside using a simple URL authentication failure handler, and once we are able to handle that, we add it inside error.message. Now when we go to /error, we take that request, go to the session, and get the attribute error.message, which was set when the failure happens. So we set that, we get it here, and we return that back. So this is how we have a /error endpoint. Now, a 401 response will already be coming from Spring Security if the user cannot or does not want to log in with GitHub. So the app is already working if you fail to authenticate, by rejecting a token grant. But to make this better, to end on a very good note, we will extend the authentication rule to reject users that are not in the right organization. And for that, we can use the GitHub API to find out more about the user. So you'll just need to plug that into the right part of the authentication process. So fortunately, for such a simple use case, Spring Boot has provided an easy extension point. If you declare a bean of type Oauth2 user service, it will be used to identify the user principal or the main user. And we can use that hook to assert the user is in the correct organization and throw an exception if it's not. It sounds a bit complicated, but let's see how this works out. So let's implement that. So what we need is a bean, and this is going to and let's import the class bean, and next we are going to implement a method which is going to be Oauth2 user service, and this will have an Oauth, not a queue, we have an Oauth2 user request, and it will also include an Oauth2 user, and this is going to be Oauth2 user service, and this will have a web client which will make the request to GitHub to get back the organizations list. So we'll add WebClient later. So before that, let's just make this method. Now we need to add WebClient first. So we don't have that yet. So first let's do that, and let's get the WebClient beam from Spring documentation. It will be in the description below. So a lot of things are required here. So let's import them very quickly. So import class, import class, import class. And we have it right here. So just to have it clearly here, we can do this. And on top we need to import WebClient, so let's do that now. So let me just find out where WebClient is, and then we can add it inside our application. So yeah, right here, and we go here, and all we have to do is add the reactive function. So for this we will need a dependency, so let's add that dependency as well. So for that we can go to the pom.xml for this particular file. So let's go to the pom first, and then we will see why we don't have reactive inside our application. So let's go inside the pom, and here we have Spring Boot Starter Oauth2 client, we have Xplux. Yeah, we needed reactive netty. So let's refresh Maven to get that. Cannot reconnect. Let's do that again. We are syncing, and we should be having the reactor netty in no time. Then we can have the web client ready. So the web client will contact GitHub, get back the principal user, get the organization URLs, and then we check whether we are a part of that organization. If not, we return back an error, which we will see in some time. So let's implement that now. So now this should be available, and yes, we have the web client, and all we have to do right now is implement our service. So let's do that here. First, let's have a way of getting back a user from the Oauth2 service. For that, we'll be using the default Oauth2 service. So default Oauth2 user service, which will be our delegate, and this is going to be new default Oauth2 service. Next, what we do is a big return. So return request, and here inside this, what we do is first Oauth2 user equal to delegate dot load user. So in this way we load the user first. Next, we check whether we are loading it from GitHub or not. So if not GitHub dot equals, and we get the request dot get client registration dot get registration ID, which will be GitHub or Google based on what we provide. And if it's not GitHub, then we just return the user that we have, and we are good to go. Now comes the next part. So here what we do is we first go to the authorized client. So Oauth2 authorized client equal to new Oauth2 authorized client, and inside this we have we use a constructor to do get client registration and also user.get name. And once this is done, the next part would be this. So let's just take a minute to implement this correctly. And this is just boilerplate from the documentation, so I just have to make sure that this is correct and nothing is wrong here. So yep, we have the get name and the access token, the client. Yep, the next part. So now we have the client to contact GitHub. We have the user, which will have the attributes of the organization URLs. So what we do is we take the URL from the user, so user.get attribute, and this will look like organization underscore URL, and this will have a Z and not an S, so we need to make sure about that. Now once we get the organization URLs, it's pretty much simple basic math, so let's actually see that in action. So all you have to do is loop through them using REST get API. So let's just quickly do that here. So yep, import the classes that we need. We need it from Java util. We have authorized client, and we're almost done with our. So let's import all of this. Import class, and all we have to do is import our main class. So let's do that right now. So here we can just do this entirely all the way down, and to make sure that it's correct. And get rid of package example because we already had that. Get this down a notch, and this will be Oauth runner. And yep, so what did we do here? This is where we were. So once we get the organization URLs back from the user, we have the URL which we use and contact GitHub. So we do a get URL, we take the attributes as our client, we retrieve or get back the organization list, we convert them to a list, and then we block them so that we can use them in orgs. Then what we do is we check any matches in orgs which are a part of the Spring projects organization. So since I am not a part of the Spring engineering team, I will not be able to access Spring projects. That's exactly what we want, because we want to check the authorization here. So 1 second, Oauth runner. And since I am not a part of the organization, I'll get an authentication error which will say not in the Spring team. So this is the final part of the puzzle. So let's go back and see what we have done. So in index.html, we have added an error div which is populated using the /error endpoint. Next, what we did was we let the configuration know that if there is a failure handler, then set an attribute to the session called as error.message. Then we go to the /error endpoint and we get that attribute back, and we return that back to our application inside index.html. And while this is happening, we also make sure that once a user tries to log in, he is checked to be a part of Spring projects or not. And if he is not, then we throw an exception called as not in Spring team. And that's how we check whether a person is inside an organization or not. So in this way, we see how we can extend the features and capabilities of Oauth2 services and Spring application to make sure that we have customized rules for our Oauth2 services. Now for the last part, let's run this application and see this in action. So we will be using a private window and not the usual window because I'm already logged in into GitHub, but I want to log in again and show it how it would be if you have been using it for the first time. So let's wait for Spring to start, and once this is done, then we can go ahead and test it out. So let's go ahead and open a private window, go to port 8080. So let's log in via GitHub. So let's 143 and sign in. And since I am not a part of Spring projects, I will be giving back an error here. So let's see if I get the error or not. So I've been redirected back to the authorized application. And when I come back, as you can see, I have not been logged in yet. So here we need to check what was happening with index.html. So we go inside index.html and we check why did the error not show up. Container error. Let's check it again. So we have our error.data.html. Okay, so yeah, we made the dot error here, and we just need to make sure that we don't make that error again. So let's run it again, since the HTML has been changed. So we have our danger, we have OAuth runner ready, and we have everything else ready. So all we have to do right now is run it again. Should be up fairly quickly. And yep, now we can refresh this again. We are here, we click here, and since I am not a part of a Spring team, I get back not in Spring team. This is how we add a custom error message inside our Spring Boot application using Oauth2 services. So the entire documentation and the code for this can be found on the Spring website, which is what I've taken as an inspiration to explain this in a video format. And please check that out in the description below. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.